All right, so now moving to the last item on our open agenda, the Christchurch City Holdings half-year report. And Paul, thank you for joining us. I invite you to come to the table and to make any comments on this report before we ask you some questions.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Andrew, and Steve Ballard, who I think most of you know, is here as well if you ask any really difficult questions. I'll get Steve to answer those.
Thank you.
But look, I'll take the report as read. But I think just in summary, 6 months ago, well, 9 months ago, when we were forecasting at the back end of COVID, May, June last year, pretty uncertain environment, pretty difficult to actually forecast what that post-COVID period was going to look like. Pleasingly, 6 months down the track, it's been a lot stronger financially than what we thought, particularly in relation to the most impacted part of our portfolio, which was the airport. So that domestic air travel market has been a lot more resilient than what we did estimate actually back in June last year. So that's the largest driver of the favourable returns relative to what we were expecting in that first half. There's still a significant element of uncertainty there, though. It's, you know, economically, the economy as a whole has performed a lot more, a lot stronger than what probably many commentators projected at the time, but there's still that lingering uncertainty there in terms of border closures, or border reopening rather. The timeframes around that are still uncertain, and when borders reopen, will they stay open, and what's the impact and the flow through? So there's those sort of issues in a travel context. We've got similar challenges in a supply chain context, which is impacting more broadly. Some of it's linked to COVID, and some of it's linked to some of the disruptions in Auckland, around being the major freight gateway for sea freight. So net, I think from Council's point of view and CCHL's point of view, the headline story is that in June last year, CCHL forecast a dividend to Council of 18 million. We revised that up to 34 million in December last year as you were going through your LTP process. As we sit here today, we remain confident that we're on track to deliver that revised dividend forecast of 34 million, which would be a decision that the board will make in June and pay in June. So that's probably all I had to provide as an overview. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Paul? Aaron?
Yeah, just on some of the global freight stuff, Paul, I believe that air freight hasn't changed much in price and the delivery mechanisms have stayed about the same, so they're performing really well. Sea freight, on the other hand, has gone up 400% and is incredibly slow. Have you had feedback from the port company why that is? Because that'll be affecting our exporters, our construction, I mean just every industry possible.
Yeah, I haven't had feedback on the pricing, Aaron. I'm not aware of the 400% stat. In terms of timeframes, though, you're right. There are challenges around freight movements in and out of New Zealand. A lot of those are linked to Auckland, because Auckland has been disrupted because they've got an automation project, a widely publicised automation project in Auckland to automate a lot of activity on the port. That hasn't been without challenge. And that has caused significant disruption in Auckland, which is cascaded through the rest of the network, because a lot of what comes into Auckland is either coastal shipped or road or rail transferred throughout the rest of the country. And the coastal shipping network has been disrupted because of the disruptions in Auckland. So that has caused timing challenges for importers and exporters.
And was there any opportunity for like Littleton Port to grab some ground off Auckland through that?
Yep, not off Auckland necessarily, but I think is it public around Maersk?
I don't know if it's public or not, but they've certainly taken some opportunity, haven't they, to increase their profile. Yeah,
I mean, LPC are capturing some market share. We can talk a little bit more openly in PX around that, but the answer is yes, but not from Auckland, more from more adjacent ports.
Right, okay, yeah, because obviously Northland took that opportunity at one point. Had some wins and losses, but yeah, okay.
Auckland and Tauranga tend to compete. I mean, the way the port network works, New Zealand's a two-hub country, a South Island hub and a North Island hub. The North Island hub logically is either Tauranga or Auckland, and that's the shipping lines make those choices, as do the importers and exporters. LPC is logically, the main South Island hub, but there are other options. And the coastal shipping network is going to link to that hub. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So I've got Jimmy, Phil, and then Yanni.
Okay, on page 225, last paragraph, I just want to clarify the figure. You mean compared to the last year, the first half, the net income, net profit reduced almost about the $20 million. However, the total operating revenue reduced for $42 million. There is a gap, the $20 million and also $42 million. I just want to know, except the tax, who else this gap? 42 and this 20.
So the revenue's down 42. Yeah, I haven't got the same page number references, Jimmy, I'm sorry, than you have. But the question was the revenue's down 42 million.
Yeah.
And the profit's down 20 million?
20 million.
That's your question?
Yeah, the question. Yeah.
And as your question,
except the tax, who else?
Well, the other difference would be operating costs.
Yeah. Operating costs.
Yeah, so I mean that's a consolidated figure though, so it's an addition of effectively the 8 subsidiary companies. So there's a number of moving parts.
Okay.
In there, there's probably 20 or 30 different things going on there to actually fully answer your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Phil.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I think you have been quite nice to Auckland, saying it was challenging. The word disaster would be a lot better. I'm just asking a question. LPC's not, as far as you know, aren't looking to have an automated system and run down that.
LPC, good question. LPC is watching with interest. At some point that is an option. It's on their radar. They're not about to press go on it. They're watching with interest and learning from what Auckland are experiencing. There's no immediate plans to follow suit.
Apart from the loss of money, and well, we have ships coming in and out, and stuff just clagged up in Auckland. It's hopeless, all because of that system.
Yeah, you've only got to go to Auckland and you can see there's 10 or 15 vessels sitting out there just moored for days.
I just don't want to see that happen down here.
No, and it's not happening down here. But despite it not happening down here, there are some challenges because we've had vessels in at LPC berthed that have got a slot to get into Auckland on their way out or on their way back. That means they can't spend the amount of time they've needed to spend here to actually unload everything. So there's been cargo that's come into port, has remained on the vessel, hasn't been able to be unloaded because they've got to go to get the slot in Sydney or get the slot in Auckland, and then they've had to come back. So you don't get it off. There's been vehicle movements that have actually been into port but haven't got off the boat until the second time around. Those are the sort of things that are happening all the time, unfortunately, which we can't control. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Yanni.
I'm struggling to understand why both Enable and Orion are such major sponsors of the Chamber of Commerce. Like, they're monopolies. I can't see what benefit it is for them to be involved in a sort of lobby organisation.
I think they see themselves as corporate citizens of Canterbury and supporting organisations like the two you mentioned, who are key stakeholders in our community, in our corporate community. They see supporting those and aligning themselves with those organisations as being consistent with their broader objectives in a commercial context.
Do you find it sort of like okay that they would support an organisation that wants us to sell off our assets? Oh, is that? No, I mean.
So, the first question is valid, and I think the answer is pretty obvious. The second is going well beyond what's a reasonable question for a 6-monthly report. The reason strategically why our companies would want to have a relationship with others in the business community, I think the answer is pretty obvious, but it's a valid question. The second question I don't think is a reasonable question for the 6-monthly report at all.
So, but they're part of the organisation that makes submissions to us during the LTP. Why wouldn't they be neutral?
All right.
So, okay. The other thing is, can I just get a sense of what's happening as part of our letter of expectation? We expected that we get a report at least 6 monthly on progress of achieving remuneration expectations across the group and in implementing the living wage. Can you give us I was quite concerned, for example, that the Orion CEO salary remuneration wasn't disclosed. But can you give us some sense of what's been happening with our expectations across the remuneration and also the living wage? What the trends are, I think personally, any transparency we could get when CEOs are appointed would be welcome, but I mean, obviously I'll leave that for you to respond.
So there's a workshop
Next week.
next Tuesday to cover all of that. So that's the appropriate forum to work through that.
What are we workshopping?
Every aspect of the question you just asked.
But this is like the 6 monthly report.
Yep.
So we can't get any sense now what's been happening.
Well, there's a package of information that we've got that addresses that. That's not before you today, and it's not in front of me today either.
Right.
That I think we can have a much more informed discussion if you can allow us to take you through a package of information that sets all of that out, which we're preparing for the workshop next Tuesday.
Will that be public?
No, the workshop won't be public.
Is there anything that we can say publicly about what's been happening?
Well, let's discuss that at the workshop on Tuesday. That's the purpose of the workshop.
And we've also got the statement of intent coming back, obviously. Given the discussion that happened around the letter of expectation, I imagine that some of the matters that you're talking about will come into play around the statement of intent discussion, which is why the workshop prior to that is important.
But the comments in the media, for example, when new CEOs are appointed and we refuse to release how much they're getting paid, just looks bad, right? And that's public. So I can't understand why we shouldn't be able at least to show what the general trends are in terms of our performance monitoring around
So as Paul has
I
suggested...
mean, the living wage has got huge public interest,
Yeah.
as does CEO remuneration.
So let's get the information, which is the important part. That's what we want, that's what we need, that's what we expect, that's what we've said that we expect. If Paul's electing to bring that to us by way of a workshop, and that's the best forum to present that information, then that works. But quite rightly, and you're raising it now, how and when the information that's presented at the workshop and to what extent that becomes public will be something that is absolutely on the table for discussion at the workshop, including the specific matters that you've raised. But let's have the workshop and see what's been presented, and then once we've got that information, we're in a far better position to discuss how we want to handle it. But I don't doubt, looking at the public discussion that happened around the letter of expectation, that some of the matters that you've raised will come into the discussion for the statement of intent as well. So getting the timing and sequencing of this right and getting the correct and full information will be vital in terms of the development of the SLI.
Yep. Thanks, Andrew.
Nothing further, Paul, you wanted to add on that?
No, look, I'm really looking forward to the workshop discussion. I think we've got a couple of hours set aside, and I think that's a much more appropriate way to actually work it through with the right information in front of everybody, so we're speaking the same language.
Yeah, I mean, what we're hearing today is that there's a degree of interest, a strong degree of interest in the matters that we're going to be discussing at that workshop. Let's have the workshop, and at that time we can work out where we go from there with that information. May well be the statement of intent discussion is where much of it lands.
And the workshop's sort of linked to that, Andrew. Exactly right.
Correct. Yeah.
And that's what we agreed we would do.
That was my understanding. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, moving on to further questions. Aaron.
Yeah, sorry, I should have asked it before. So just around the airport, and in the red there is the Tasman and Pacific Islands passenger numbers and also international passenger volumes. They're all obviously in red, but the comment has no expectation of a Tasman bubble in FY21 and no expectation of a wider border opening. And is that updated now?
No, that was the view at 31 December. If we updated it a month ago, it might have been the same. If we updated it even a week ago, it might have been the same. If we updated it earlier this week, it might have changed. But we're going to find out on the 6th of April, I believe. It's a really difficult one to call.
Yeah,
and even if we have certainty around a time frame to open up a Trans-Tasman bubble, how that then plays out is inherently uncertain as well.
Yeah, so from speaking to some of the staff there, that obviously they're ready to go and they have plans if it happens. But
we've been ready to go since October last year.
Yeah, but from the government's perspective, have we heard whether all the bubbles are in and out of Auckland only, or are they talking, will Christchurch and the South Island be in the conversation?
I'm led to believe it's definitely a national. So they're effectively thinking about New Zealand as another state of Australia, if you want to think about it that way. So it'll be a state-by-state bubble from New Zealand into different states of Australia. That won't be Auckland-centric. The intentions, if you look at the websites of the airlines who are taking forward bookings, they are taking bookings in and out of Christchurch and Auckland. So definitely Christchurch is well positioned.
Cool. Thank you. Any further questions? All right. So we've got a resolution in front of us to note the reports. Do I have a mover for that? Tim, seconded by Pauline. Discussion? Yep. Yanni.
So I was just a little bit concerned around some of the information in the report that two of our companies are major sponsors of the Chamber of Commerce, who submitted that CCHL be directed to provide council with advice on how to repackage its investments to maintain services for Christchurch while releasing capital for new investments. And I mean, I just find it a little bit ironic, really, that there's this kind of advocacy and lobbying, which I welcome from the Chamber, that they're entirely able to do that. But it does seem to me that there is a bit of a conflict of interest issue happening here, where you've got major funders who we own, then paying an organisation to come and criticise us. It seems a bit weird. So, I mean, you know, it's no criticism of the Chamber. I understand the role that they play in the city. But I just wonder how we're kind of measuring the value of what we're getting from our companies, and whether CCHL needs to have some sort of policy around that. So, you know, I welcome the information in the report. I do think we need to start thinking about the remuneration and living wage in a transparent way. And although I welcome the workshop, the reality is that there's huge public interest in terms of what's happening with living wage and senior executive remuneration. And I think we should be as open and transparent as possible when it comes to discussing that, so that the public can see what's going on. So happy to receive the report. I obviously, I think it's probably apparent that others don't share my concerns around that, but I would encourage you to read the submissions from the Chamber to past annual and LTPs, and to reflect on whether it's appropriate that our companies are funding criticism of ourselves, or whether there's a better use of that money coming back to the ratepayers.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you, and I think it's actually a really good thing that our companies are involved with the Chamber of Commerce. They do a hell of a lot for the business in Christchurch. I don't think we've got to the stage yet where we blacklist people, organisations that have a different view than we do. And I think that if we got to that stage, none of us would be sitting here. We'd probably be in a jail somewhere. So I think it's excellent that we're involved in it. The training that the Chamber of Commerce do throughout all businesses of all sizes is absolutely exceptional, and is a backbone to the industry in Christchurch and Canterbury. So I'm really pleased that they are.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Sarah.
I'll just add that, you know, companies like City Care help sponsor Student Volunteer Army and those kind of projects. And yeah. I don't think we're allowed to step in this debate otherwise. Well, no, it was receiving. We were told that we were told in the informal that it was because it was just receiving. It was okay. Yeah.
Yeah. The advice that we'd given was that
that it was
that's the case.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any further discussion on this report? No. All right. So this has been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against? That's carried. All right. So now if we can move to the resolution to exclude